Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. Ready for a story? It involves a birthday party, a whole lot of missing cash, and a gunshot. Buckle up because things are about to get interesting.
Yeah, this one's got a few layers to it. We're talking assault charges, conflicting accounts, and even a petition for habeas corpus. That's where someone challenges the legality of their imprisonment, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're going behind the scenes of the legal system, folks. And our main source, the 2012 U.S. District Court opinion on Remy Smith's petition.
So we're looking at the case through the lens of Remy's attempt to overturn her conviction.
Exactly. We're going to put on our detective hats, analyze the court's take, and see if we can figure out what really went down. Think you're up for the challenge?
Let's do it. To set the scene, we're in the heart of Manhattan, Meatpacking District to be exact. It's July 13th, 2007, 4 a.m. A birthday party is winding down, and Remy Smith realizes a wad of cash, $3,000 to be precise, has vanished from her purse.
Oh, that sinking feeling, right. I can only imagine the tension in the air. So who enters the picture at this point?
Well, that's where Makeda Joseph comes in. Another partygoer. Remy believes Makeda might have something to do with the missing money. Their history. A little complicated even before this whole money situation.
Okay, so there's already some pre-existing tension between them, and then this missing cash just throws fuel on the fire.
Right. The connection is definitely there through that missing money.
So walk me through what happened next. I know things get a little murky here.
Absolutely. There's several different versions of the events. Makeda Joseph claims there was an altercation inside a car, a gun went off, and then Remy searched her purse before fleeing the scene.
Hold on, I'm trying to picture this. Who else was in the car? And did their stories match up with Makeda's?
Right. There were three other witnesses present at the party. Crystal Bolton, Ojidun Ojuwol, and Crystal Ricks. Their accounts don't perfectly align, which is where things start to get intriguing. There are inconsistencies that just raise eyebrows.
Like what? Give me an example. What doesn't add up?
We'll take Ojuwol. He initially claimed to be asleep during the incident. But, get this, later he changes his story after speaking with Makeda Joseph.
Whoa, talk about a plot twist. Changed his story after talking to the alleged victim. That's a huge red flag. Did the court find that suspicious?
Oh yeah, it definitely raises questions about the reliability of his testimony. They definitely noted that discrepancy. So we've got conflicting stories, a chaotic scene. It all leads to a trial, of course.
Yeah.
What kind of evidence did they present?
All right, let's head to the courtroom. I'm curious about the gun description. There was something about it being heavier. Fill me in on that.
Ah, yes. Interesting detail. Officer Paul McLaughlin, a crime scene reconstructionist, he basically pieces together how a crime might have happened, testified about the scene. Now, the gun itself never recovered, but Joseph described it as being heavier than the officer's .45 caliber pistol.
Okay, so no gun, just a description. Did she mean heavier in terms of weight or something else?
Good question. She clarified later that she meant visually heavier, not by actual weight, more like it was bulkier in appearance.
Ah, so a bigger gun, but still no actual weapon to examine. Talk about a missing piece of the puzzle. What else did they present at the trial?
Well, Remy's defense attorney tried to bring in a ballistics expert.
Okay, and a ballistics expert would have.
They could have testified about the possibility of the gun accidentally firing during a struggle. But the judge, sticking closely to the available evidence, restricted their argument. There wasn't enough concrete proof of a struggle over the gun.
Ah, so the judge was like, let's stick to the facts here. Makes sense. I wonder how often expert opinions are shut down like that.
It's a balancing act. Judges need to be sure that any expert testimony is relevant and based on solid evidence, not just speculation. I think in this case, the judge felt like there wasn't enough there to allow for a hypothetical struggle scenario without more concrete proof.
Gotcha. So no ballistics expert. What about Makeda Joseph? Her testimony must have been crucial. Did the jury find her convincing?
Makeda Joseph, yeah, definitely a key witness. She gave her account of what went down in the car. But during cross-examination, something pretty interesting came out. She had filed a lawsuit against Remy as a result of the shooting for $29 million.
$29 million. Wow. You have to wonder if that huge potential payout influenced her testimony at all. Did Remy's defense team bring that up?
Absolutely. They pointed out that Joseph was the only one who claimed that Remy had a gun, and they argued that her lawsuit might have biased her testimony, basically suggesting she had a financial motive to make Remy look guilty.
Yeah, that makes you think, like maybe her story wasn't as straightforward as it seemed on the surface.
Right. Lots of room for interpretation here. And that brings us to another big issue, the jury instructions. Now remember, the judge explains the law to the jury before they deliberate, right? So in this case, The judge told them that if they believed Joseph's testimony was truthful, her words alone were enough to satisfy that beyond a reasonable doubt standard for a guilty verdict.
Hold on. So just her words alone, wouldn't that make her testimony the be-all and end-all? Wouldn't that completely outweigh everything else?
You're hitting on a really crucial point. Both the Appellate Division and the Court of Appeals, those are higher courts, that review trial decisions agreed that this instruction was a mistake. They acknowledged that it could have downplayed the need to prove every single element of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay, so they agreed the instruction was wrong, but what happened then? Did it affect the final verdict?
That's where it gets even more interesting. Despite saying the instruction was an error, both higher courts ultimately ruled that it was harmless when you considered everything else in the trial.
So they're basically saying it was a mistake, but not a big enough mistake to change the outcome. I can totally see why Remy would still challenge this. Seems like a big deal to have a flawed instruction, even if they say it didn't affect things in the end.
And that's exactly why Remy filed that habeas corpus petition. She's arguing that even if the higher courts called it harmless, that faulty instruction could have swayed the jury, and her conviction might be on shaky ground.
Okay, so we've got the scene, we've got conflicting stories, questions about witness credibility, and a controversial jury instruction. What exactly did Remy argue in her petition, and what was the district court's final decision? We've got a lot to unpack here.
Remy's petition, it brings up some really interesting points, like she argues that the gun might have actually belonged to Makita Joseph.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to follow. We know the gun was never found, so how can she even suggest that? What's her logic there?
Well, she pointed out that none of the other witnesses, except for Joseph, ever said they saw Remy with a gun.
Right.
Remember that heavier description?
Right.
Remy's argument was that maybe, just maybe, the gun was already in the car, belonging to Joseph. And that whole heavier thing. Maybe it was based on a gun Joseph was already familiar with.
So she's turning the tables, saying the victim might have actually brought the weapon. That's a bold strategy. Anything else to back that up?
Yeah, she did. Remember the broken rearview mirror? The prosecution said that was from a struggle over Remy's purse, but Remy said, no, maybe it was broken during a fight for the gun.
Ah, I see. Tying it back to that whole ballistics expert thing. If there was a struggle for the gun, then an accidental firing becomes a lot more plausible.
Exactly. She's poking holes in the prosecution's story, introducing reasonable doubt by suggesting other possibilities that weren't really explored during the trial.
Makes sense. And then there's that $29 million lawsuit Joseph filed against Remy. That's a lot of money. How did Remy use that in her petition?
Oh, she definitely brought it up. She argued that a lawsuit that big could have totally skewed Joseph's testimony, like it gave her a big reason to paint Remy as the aggressor. Remy's team was basically saying, hey, Joseph had a financial incentive to make sure Remy got convicted.
Wow, so she's questioning the victim's motives, suggesting that maybe her story wasn't as objective as it seemed. Did the district court buy any of this?
They considered it, for sure. But ultimately, they denied Remy's petition, their main reason. Not enough evidence to support the whole Joseph owned the gun thing.
So they didn't completely shut down her arguments, but they didn't think they were strong enough to overturn the conviction. What about that jury instruction issue? Did they address that?
Yeah, they did. The district court said, look, the higher courts already said it was a mistake. But, and this is important, they emphasized that you have to look at jury instructions as a whole, not just pick apart one sentence.
Okay, so big picture, not just focusing on one little thing. What did they decide?
They concluded that, yeah, there was a flaw, but the overall instructions were good enough. They said it didn't affect the fairness of the trial.
So it's like, they're saying, we see your point, but we don't think it fundamentally messed things up. I bet that was frustrating for Remy. She raises all these arguments, tries to show that her conviction wasn't solid, and the court basically says, nope, we're sticking with the original decision.
Yeah, it really shows you how hard it is to challenge a conviction, even when there are loose ends and inconsistencies. Like, it's not enough to just say, hey, maybe things happened differently. You have to bring some serious evidence to prove those other possibilities.
Right. It's about meeting that burden of proof. It makes you realize how much weight is given to the original verdict.
It is. The legal system is built on procedure and proving things beyond a reasonable doubt. It's tough, but that's how they try to make sure things are fair and the decisions aren't just random.
This whole case makes you think about the power of a single story, especially in a he said, she said situation.
For sure. It shows how one person's account can shape the whole narrative. And it reminds us that the legal system isn't just about cold, hard facts. It's about storytelling, about convincing a judge or jury that your version of events is the one they should believe.
We've heard Makeda Joseph's side, but we only get glimpses of Remy's perspective through her legal arguments, right?
That's true. We get caught up in the evidence and the legal back and forth, but this is about real people whose lives were changed forever by that night.
Yeah. We're missing a piece in the puzzle here, Remy's side of the story. What was going through her mind during all of this? The altercation, the trial, and even now as she tries to fight this conviction.
It's a side we don't often hear in the legal system.
Right.
It's all about evidence and procedure. It makes you realize that there are human stories behind every case, and those stories matter.
It's like that saying, there are three sides to every story, yours, mine, and the truth. And in this case, we've only really explored two of them.
Exactly. We've gotten deep into the legal arguments, the court's perspective, but we haven't really touched on Remy's own personal experience.
Right. Even in a system that tries to be impartial, you can't escape the human element. It's always there. So we've looked at the evidence, we've talked about the arguments, and we've seen how complicated this whole thing is. But even after all this, there's still a lot of ambiguity. Did Remy actually get a fair trial? Was justice served? It feels like we have more questions than answers.
And that, I think, is the nature of the legal system sometimes. It's supposed to resolve things, but sometimes there are no easy answers. There's that gray area, uncertainty, questions that linger even after a verdict is reached.
So what do we do with those questions? How do we make sense of a case like this when it's not clear-cut?
That's where the real value of doing a deep dive like this comes in. It's not about deciding whether Remy was guilty or innocent. It's about thinking critically, about recognizing how complicated the legal system can be, and about understanding that there can be different perspectives on truth and justice.
It's about encouraging people to think for themselves, to question what they're told, and to be open to the possibility that there might be more to the story than what they see at first glance.
Yes, it's about being curious, about digging deeper, about looking at these cases from different angles and forming your own opinions. That's what makes for a well-informed public.
It really is like we're trying to put together this puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing. We might never have the whole picture, but it's that process, right?
Yeah.
Looking at the evidence, thinking through the arguments, trying to see things from different sides. That's what matters.
Yes, exactly. This case really shows how important critical thinking is. Not just taking things at face value, but really engaging with the information you're given. It's a skill you need everywhere, not just in a courtroom.
Totally. Being an informed citizen, being able to look at information, to spot bias, to come to your own conclusions. Whether you're reading news articles, listening to podcasts, even just talking with friends, that ability to think critically is crucial.
Absolutely. And I think this case shows just how human our justice system is.
Yeah.
Judges, lawyers, juries, they're all people. And they're not immune to biases or emotions. They can interpret information differently.
It's easy to forget that. We think of the law as this objective thing, but there's always that human element, which can be both good and bad.
Right. And that's why cases like Remy Smith's are so fascinating to look at. They remind us that the system, even though it's supposed to be fair, isn't perfect. There's always the possibility of mistakes, of things being interpreted in different ways. And it keeps us talking about what justice really means.
I think a big takeaway for anyone listening to this deep dive is be skeptical, not cynical, but, have that critical lens that we talked about.
I agree. It's about approaching things with a curious mind, asking questions, and remembering that there might be more to the story than meets the eye.
Exactly. Like in this case, we've got the court's opinion, we have what the witnesses said, we've heard the arguments from both sides, but we're still left wondering, what was it actually like to be Remy Smith that night? What was it like for her going through all of this?
Such important questions. And they bring us back to the fact that every legal battle is about real people. And those people's lives are deeply affected by what happens in the courtroom.
Yeah. It's so easy to get lost in the legal stuff, the procedures, the arguments. But at the heart of it all, it's about people, the choices they make, and that very human search for what's right, what's just. And even though we may never have all the answers, I think this deep dive has given us plenty to consider.
It definitely has. I think it's made us all a little more curious. It's challenged some of our assumptions. And hopefully it's encouraged everyone listening to keep thinking about the legal system and all the human stories that are a part of it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the case of Remy Smith, we'll leave you with this thought. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep that critical thinking going. You never know what you might uncover.